If anything has most influenced me is growing up in environments where people did not do well economically because of their failure to adapt to the disruptive changes taking place in the economy and the world around them. So I grew up in West Virginia, and, West Virginia has struggled mightily from the conversion from a manufacturing and industrial-based economy to a 21st century economy. When I was born, the town that I was born in had 80,000 people. Today it has 55,000 people. There are as many abandoned business facilities as occupied facilities. And then, through college, I taught, in the inner city of Chicago, and then after leaving college, I taught in inner city Baltimore at the height of the crack cocaine wars. And similarly, in the urban environment, which contrasted very strongly to the rural environment that I grew up in, what you saw was the impact of a failure to adapt to disruptive change. So in West Baltimore, where I taught, in essence, you saw the complete destruction of the old union wage industrial jobs, people who were able to work in ports, factories, and mills being forced out of work because they were largely unemployable. And so I guess what motivated me is having spent the first 25 years of my life being witness to the failure to adapt to disruptive change. It's more images than stories. I mean, where I grew up in West Virginia, for example, there are literally hundreds of acres of abandoned chemical factories. I mean, it's an absolutely post-apocalyptic scene. And when I grew up, from, age 0 to 12 or 13, those chemical plants left an industrial scar in West Virginia, and it sort of left, for lack of a better word, an intellectual scar and an emotional scar for me, because what it shows is again, the failure to adapt. And then if I were to think about Baltimore and my experience in Teach for America, what struck me was the intelligence of the kids that I taught. I taught in one of the most poor, most violent communities in the United States. And I genuinely believe that the IQ, the intellectual hardware that the kids had was competitive with the IQ. It was competitive with the intellectual hardware that people at the greatest heights in business and government have. But what I saw was the malignant impact of the community failing to nurture those intellects. So that's really what sticks out to me. I am an unapologetic optimist, and the very creation of this role, Hillary Clinton created this role in her office of the Senior Advisor for Innovation. The very creation of that job was optimistic, and the vast majority of people who gave me advice, after we developed that role, thought that I was crazy because of the intractability of many of these issues, because of, the very deeply embedded culture that is at the State Department, because of, driving change within a very old, very large hierarchy tends not to be the easiest thing in the world. So what I would say first, the biggest challenge simply goes to the issue of sprawl. So there is no more distributed an organization on planet Earth than the U.S. Department of State. We have a physical presence. We have buildings. We have embassies in places around the world where, no American private sector enterprise has a physical point of presence. We are the essence of a globally distributed organization. And when you combine that with a culture that is 200 years in the making, that automatically creates a series of challenges. Now, having said that, why we've been successful has been a combination of top-down and edge of the network empowerment. So we are a very hierarchical organization by our nature. And to be blunt, the fact that the person at the top of the hierarchy, Hillary Clinton, has been so unabashed promoting her innovation agenda from the time that she got in here has proven to be powerful. So while I believe that innovation comes from the edge of the network, in the case of the State Department, it was very necessary to have our muscular Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, prioritize this and protect it from the top. Now, in terms of what the greatest successes have been, today is Wednesday, so yesterday was literally my third year on the job. We've gotten an enormous amount done in 3 years. And I would say that if anything, we have recast the role of the diplomat. So if you think about diplomacy during the Cold War, the primary function was reporting. When you're in an environment of information scarcity, sending information back to Washington that was otherwise inaccessible. Today we live in an environment of information abundance. And so in the face of that, what you have to do is change the very nature of diplomacy from being reporting to analysis, becoming more of a problem-solving institution. And I think that we've made a lot of progress to that end. I've got a long laundry list of specific projects that I can point to. But at the most macro level, that is what has been most consequential. First of all, there are 195 countries on planet Earth. 195. We focus on 194 of them. So, by the nature of who we are and what we do, our audience is principally the 194 countries who aren't America in terms of messaging and other such things. Let me give an example or two of a thing that we have done that has gotten some profile domestically. Have you heard of the Text Haiti program?
Yes.
Okay, so where if you texted the word Haiti to a short code 90999, $10 got added to your phone bill. All $10 went for earthquake relief in Haiti.
Right.
So that was done on my team. We conceived of and implemented that program and raised $35 million in 2 weeks. So you've heard of the program. Did you know it was a State Department program?
I did not, no.
There you go. So, that was, conceived of by me, 2 Katies and a Caitlin. Myself and 3 young women on my staff here. The largest mobile giving program in philanthropic history. That was done, it was 5 p.m. The earthquake in Haiti took place around 5 p.m. Eastern, so sort of late afternoon, early evening. When we told Secretary Clinton, who was then in Hawaii, planning to travel to Papua New Guinea, a trip that she didn't get to take, what had happened, what she insisted that we do was have a program up by the following morning. By the time people had their first cup of coffee in their hand and were hearing about this news for the first time, a program in place by the next morning where the American citizens themselves could give back. But in the federal government, the 3 people with the most followers on Twitter, number 1 is Barack Obama, number 2 is John McCain, I'm number 3. If you just take, my Facebook subscribers and my followers on Twitter, you're talking about 500,000 people, more or less, who are learning about foreign policy in a way that they weren't as recently as 3 years ago. It's sort of an innovative way of communicating with global audiences, but, obviously domestic audiences are put into that too. People at the senior-most levels of government who are consumed by thinking about what's next tend not to do the best job at what they're doing. And so I have really been heads down and continue to be, focusing on this agenda day in, day out. And I don't know that I think it would be awfully presumptuous of me to presume to sort of self-define a legacy. What I would say is, what I'm hopeful is that from the time that Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State to the time that Hillary Clinton departed as Secretary of State, what I hope is that the practice of diplomacy at the State Department will have changed more over those 4 years than in any 4-year period dating back to Thomas Jefferson being our first Secretary of State. So, I'm very ambitious in terms of what I hope we achieve, and, history will tell whether we've been successful or not. Sure, so I think there are 3 things. Number 1 is the 21st century is a lousy time to be a control freak. Yeah, I really believe that hierarchies are hardwired to optimize for control. I think the kind of control that hierarchies, governments, and other large institutions, governments, large corporations, and other large hierarchies, the kind of control that they had 10, 15, or 20 years ago is no longer possible. And fighting that loss of control is ultimately a losing fight. In the face of hyperconnectivity, there is a massive shift in geopolitical power. Most people think about shifts in geopolitical power on a geographic basis, from west to east, from North America and Europe to Asia, or from the global north to the global south. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But what I do know is that there is a massive shift of geopolitical power from hierarchies to citizens and networks of citizens. Now, the hierarchies, the big institutions, the governments have a choice. Do they accept these shifts in power and seek to harness them in their self-interest, or do they fight against them? And I think the right answer is to accept the shifting nature of power made possible by increasingly empowered citizens and figure out how to make it work for you rather than fighting it. So that's thing 1. And thing 2 is, the higher I rise, the longer time I spend with people who are powerful, the more that I come to believe that Audacity matters. When I started my NGO in a basement 12 years ago, part of many of the early supporters for that NGO I connected to because I figured out people's email addresses. As ridiculous as it seems, we were 4 guys in a basement. We didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. And it was just like, all right, well, if you want to go see Bill Gates, it's got to be, Bill period Gates at Microsoft, B Gates, William _ Gates. It's got to be one of 10 or 12 email addresses. And look, I'll be damned if I didn't manage to get in front of a lot of powerful, important people who later supported my NGO because I had the audacity to reach out to them directly, hustle my way to get in front of them, and, make a compelling case while I was there. Similarly, I find, at the level that I'm operating now, if you act like a bureaucrat, you're going to be a bureaucrat. But that if you have a measure of, audacity and a willingness to, be aggressive about an idea, then that idea has a far greater chance of finding a toehold at the tables of power. So I think that, I don't think you need to go, I don't think that one needs to go rogue, but I think that being very aggressive about one's beliefs and being unabashed and, not always necessarily following the minutia of protocol is necessary to truly ascend. And then the third is, I think you've got to engage young people in a way that we historically have not done. It is not a coincidence that so many of the breakthrough innovations that are hitting the marketplace are being developed by 20-somethings. I do believe that people who grew up digital are hardwired a little differently than people my age and older. So I'm 40 years old, so I'm 15 years removed from being a digital native. And I think that if you really want to be able to harness innovation, if you really want to you know, if you really want disruption to be something that works for you, you've got to connect with and empower people who, in the conventional sense, don't have the right resume or who don't have, you know, the right experience. You know, I think we've got to get past the notion of years of experience as a principal test for whether somebody ought to be doing their job. And I think that there are certain communities within the United States, you know, obviously Silicon Valley among them, that are very good at recognizing that disruption can come from a dorm room, can come from the head of a 24 or 25-year-old. But I think that it's too often the case throughout much of the rest of the United States and throughout much of the rest of the world that people empowered diminish or demean the thinking and the ideas of 20-somethings. And I think they do so at their peril, because I got news for you. Disruption will increasingly come from the heads and hearts of 20-somethings.